So let's look at cell transport. And when we talk about cell transport, we're talking about essentially things, molecules, ions, whatever, going in and out of the cell, not necessarily the cell moving. We're looking at things going in and out of the cell. So passive transport, as you guys know, just means there's no energy required. There's no energy expended on the part of the cell. Oof, this is kind of weird. So this kind of got kind of squishy. Basically, the three types of passive transport are going to be simple diffusion and osmosis. Remember, osmosis is just diffusion of water. So simple diffusion and osmosis, and that's just you're going from your high concentration on the right to the low concentration on the left, okay? And that requires no energy. They're just flying across, easy peasy. You also have your facilitated diffusion, and we saw this when you guys did your models of the cell wall, or the cell membrane. You guys had those little straws. Some molecules can go through those straws. That's called facilitated diffusion. All of these are passive, no energy required. So like we said, diffusion is the random movement, so we don't really know where the molecules are gonna go, but we know they're going from high concentration to low concentration. They want to, their ultimate goal, the molecule's ultimate goal is equilibrium. They want whatever on one side to be equal on the other side. So we talk about a gradient. They diffuse down a concentration gradient. So they diffuse towards the area of low concentration. That's just what that means. Osmosis, and you're just talking about water, okay? So diffusion of water. So you've got, in the little picture up at the right, you have high concentration of water outside the cell. Water is going to diffuse in. Water can come in no problem. So that water is going to make its way in if there's not a lot of water on the inside of the cell, because water wants equilibrium. It wants homeostasis. You also see this little tube down here in the corner. You see you've got a little bit of a semi-permeable membrane, which is what the plasma membrane is, semi-permeable. Some things can get in, some things can't. That's what semi-permeable means. So you've got less water on the right side. Less water on the left side, more water on the right side. So you're going to see some movement of molecules. Those molecules are going to want to be equal on each side, on both sides, I should say. Because of that, water has we know that it has a series of interesting properties. So if you look, the water level might rise, okay, because they want that concentration on either side to be equal. So if that means there needs to be more water, then that's what's going to happen. So if the molecules can't cross that plasma membrane, like in the little U-shaped tubes down there, the water will move to even out the concentration. And that's when we see water on that right side of the U tube higher than that of the left, if that makes sense. So its job is, so down there, the net direction of osmosis is determined by the solute concentrations on the two sides of the membrane. Water wants, it's a peacekeeper, right? It wants everything to be okay. It wants equilibrium. So what it does is water will then move to make those concentrations equal if the molecules themselves cannot move, because they cannot cross that membrane. Okay, so let's talk about hypo, and isotonic solutions. So this is one of these diagrams I want you guys to become very familiar with. Up top, you have the animal cell. Down here, you've got the plant cell. Obviously, we know one of the main differences is the cell wall. And so how a plant and animal cell reacts in different solutions is determined by that cell wall in large part. So you have your hypotonic solution. And what this is you have a situation where there is more water on the outside than the inside. I'll say that again. Hypotonic, more water on the outside of the cell than on the inside. So what is water going to want to do? It's going to want to equal out. So it's going to want to enter that cell to make sure that there's the concentration of water on the inside matches that of the outside. When that happens with an animal cell, it bursts, okay? Too much water, the cell pops open. Think of it like hypo, like it gets kind of big and it bursts. Now with the water cell, the plant cell, they're designed to hold water, okay? Because they cannot necessarily get their own water. They're pretty much stuck to where they're planted. So they will keep that water and they'll get what's called turgid. okay? And they'll get kind of like full of water, but they have that big vacuole that will store that, okay? In an isotonic solution, you have normal. You've got water coming in, water coming out. It's all equal. The cell's happy. Same with that plant cell. So isotonic kind of means equilibrium, right? It's in homeostasis. It's all good. Then you have your hypertonic. And that's where when we talked about like salty foods, that's what's happening. You have more water in your cells than outside of your cells, right? So what does salt do? Salt draws water out. So you have more water on the outside than the inside, and that water is going to want to go out of the cell to make those concentrations equal. So what happens? You get your shriveled cells. We call them plasmolyzed in the plant cell. Take a moment, write this down, copy this down. We're going to come back to this idea of the different types of solutions. So facilitated diffusion, right? You have a molecule that's going to bind to a protein on one side of the cell membrane. That carrier protein, which is that purple protein there, is going to change shape and transport the molecule down the gradient. Again, still not using energy. It looks like it might be, but it's not. There is no, what the energy that's used is ATP, and we'll talk about this when we talk about active transport. So there's no ATP expended here. This is, even though there is some movement, there's no energy put into this event. There you go. So these ion channels also provide, think of your straws, these tiny small passageways across the cell membrane through which specific ions can diffuse. Now remember, movement across that membrane also depends on if it's a polar molecule or a nonpolar molecule. Ions we know are charged. So that might be difficult at times for them to cross. That's why they have these little ion channels where they can get in and out. Things like potassium is a big one that needs to get in and out of the cell. So that's it for now. Like I said, make sure you know that chart just so you're familiar with that, and that you just keep that in mind that osmosis, diffusion, and facilitated diffusion are passive ways of transporting molecules across the cell membrane.